I'm joined by Emerita Professor Jacqueline Fawcett. Jacqueline is one of the most widely known and influential names in nursing. She has published far too much, spoken at far too many conferences, and received far too many awards for me to list them here. Suffice to say, anyone watching this recording either has and or will cite her work and engage with what she has to say at some point, probably several points. Now, Jacqueline is a contributor to the Routledge Handbook of Philosophy and Nursing, a book that hopefully will appear in 2023. And her contribution speaks to the concept of nurseology. Now, this term is used by Jacqueline in relation or in regard to holarchy. And for anyone unfamiliar with holarchy, this word, originally minted by Kostler in his 1967 work The Ghost in the Machine, references a form of unusual hierarchy in which holons are both wholes and parts that exist in complex relationship. Jacqueline, please, what is nurseology? How does nurseology fit or mesh with the concept of holarchy? And most importantly, what are the epistemological and indeed the practical implications of these ideas? Why might or why do these issues matter to nurses and to nursing?
Okay, well, nurseology is simply the name that some of us have been using for the discipline instead of nursing, and it's as simple as that. So instead of calling our discipline nursing, some of us are calling it nurseology. And interestingly, the first use of the term was in an article by Josephine Patterson, a US-based nurse, in about 1971 in a journal called Nursing Research. Then, in around 1976, Nancy Roper of the University of Edinburgh in the UK used the term in an article in the Journal of Advanced Nursing. And I don't think it was the first issue of the first volume, but it was in the first volume. And some years later, I asked Alison Tierney, who worked with Nancy at Edinburgh, why nurseology wasn't continued to be used in the UK. And Alison's response was that the whole idea of nursing being a discipline was kind of new, and university-based education was kind of new in the UK, or at least in Scotland at that time. And so she and Nancy and Logan were concerned that using the term would be put off to people and too much for them to deal with, as well as thinking about nursing as a discipline and a profession. So I just, some years ago, when I was having some dialogue with some of my PhD students at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, one of the students came up with, well, why don't we call it nurseology? And then I got into the literature and found these references from Nancy and from Josephine Patterson. And so we just started calling it nurseology. And it's probably equally accepted around the globe, any place, which is to say not very much. However, we some of us who are in the American Academy of Nursing, not under the auspices of the Academy, but as a group who met and had collegial relationships through the Academy, decided to start a website for all things theoretical in nursing. And so what are we going to call it? So I said among the group, well, why don't we call it nurseology? And they said, that's a good idea, Jackie. So we have a website called nurseology.net, and has all sorts of theories and philosophies and conceptual models and exemplars and some unpublished papers and notable works where we write blogs about people who, articles that are particularly important, and we write in memoriam memorials to some of our colleagues who've died. Most recently, I wrote one for Betty Newman, who died on May 28th. And we have weekly blogs. Every Tuesday a blog comes out. People can subscribe to the website and get the weekly blogs and get access to it. There's no charge. And we keep statistics, and people from many, many different countries at least access the website. I think a lot of them are probably students. And so like in my course, my PhD course, I refer the students to that site, and I think a lot of other people do. So if you and your colleagues in the UK did the same thing, then more and more people in the UK would know that term, and they could decide to use it or not. And then I refer to all nurses then as nurseologists. And whenever I go around to talk to people, I introduce myself as a nurseologist. And it's very interesting. Um, the general public is more accepting of the term than nurses are. The people within our own discipline they have all sorts of reasons. And the reason that we decided, I think that I decided that nurseology was a good term for the discipline, it puts us on the same level of knowledge development as the other ologies, so psychology and physiology and so on. And it makes a political difference in universities at times, although I have not yet convinced my dean or my faculty to change the name of our college to the College of Nurseology and Exercise Sciences, or my department call it the Department of Nurseology, but I'm working on that. And we're having a new dean coming in August, and he happens to not be a nurse, and we have an exercise and health sciences department, and we'll soon have an urban public health department as well as nursing. So I may have a chance with the new dean, but I certainly am going to talk to him about that. And interestingly, there's a university or a college, St. Mary's College in Kurumi, Japan, who have been using the Roy adaptation model for many years, and they established a research center about 2 or 3 years ago, and they're calling it the Roy Academic Nurseology Research Conference, and they put out an annual newsletter called the Nurseology Letter. And so there's different people are using the term, and eventually I think that school, that college may change the name of their School of Nursing to Nurseology, because they're very receptive to that. I'm very honored to have a visiting faculty appointment with St. Mary's College, and I give a lecture, 2 lectures actually every year in the winter for their faculty and students, and I work with them on other things at times. So basically, we're just using nurseology not as any big time fancy kind of thing, other than just the name for the discipline, and nurseologist as the name for nurses. And as Peggy Chin, my dear colleague and friend, has mentioned, that nursing means slowly drinking a drink. You nurse a drink, or breastfeeding. And so we do think that nurseology is a more dignified name. And as I said, it puts us on the same level playing field, if you will, as the other ologies. And then people start thinking about us as knowledge workers instead of handmaidens to physicians. And I think that may be the most important kind of thing, important contribution of this idea. The holarchy is the idea of within the discipline, the knowledge, from my perspective, can be arranged into the meta-paradigm, philosophies, conceptual models, theories, and empirical indicators. And I used to call it a hierarchy. And then I think Margaret Newman started using the term holarchy. And I thought, well, I don't really mean one to be better than another, which is implied in a hierarchy. So I changed the term to holarchy. So it's just a convention of labeling things and making, at least endeavoring to get the point across that like, meta paradigm isn't better than a theory. It just comes before the theory, and the theory is in the philosophies and conceptual models and everything are just derived from the meta paradigm, which is simply a statement of what is the reason for the focus of our discipline.
Okay, that's very interesting. I think in your wider writings, you've often been a strong advocate for knowledge creation within nursing, and the idea that knowledge should come from and be owned by nursing. And as we've discussed briefly in the past, I'm anxious that nurseology might, in less nuanced hands, signal or imply or generate forms of professionalism, forms of thinking about nursing as a profession that are inward rather than outward facing. Thus, if nursing knowledge is to be found within nursing, if that is to be our focus, are we turning our backs on others? So many of the ideas that inform nursing actions come or are derived from non-nursing sources. And speaking personally, whatever it is that nursing is, nursing and nurses have to learn from others, and hence we need to, in my view, dismantle rather than erect blocks or barriers to interdisciplinary learning, interdisciplinary cooperation. Please, are my anxieties misgrounded? Is nurseology inward or outward facing?
I think it can be both. My concern is that when we get involved in multiple discipline endeavors, that we forget our own knowledge and we end up going along with other people's knowledge, and instead of saying, this is what I'm contributing to, for example, a research project. So this is my perspective as a nurseologist, and I'm building my knowledge. And if you're a sociologist, for example, then you're building your knowledge. So we're perhaps in research or even in practice, we're looking at the same population, but we're asking different questions. And I have an example of this that happened several years ago. I was asked to be the co-PI on a grant funded by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Department of Public Health, and they had a program for women for breast and cancer cancers, breast and cervical cancer screening, and the sociologist was known to the public health department and done some work with him. So he came over to our college and he got linked up with me, and we devised this project to ask the nurses who were doing this screening what their work was, because nobody had really codified what work they were doing. They were doing great work, but it was never like articulated what it was. And so we each asked very different questions coming from different perspectives. I asked questions that came from the conceptual model of nursing and health policy, because we were interested in the kind of work that they were doing and how it affected policy. And Russell Shute, who was my partner in crime, if you will, he's a sociologist. He was very interested in job satisfaction. So we ended up with two different articles, and I was a lead author on one, and he was the lead author on the other one. And he focused on job satisfaction, and I focused on the work of the nurses within the context of this conceptual model of nurseology. And it worked really, really well, and it convinced me that you can do multiple discipline work where both people are very clear about what their perspectives are, and then ask the questions that stem from their perspectives. And it was joyful work. We had one of our RAs was a PhD nurseology student, and I think one or two others were from sociology, and we all worked really, really well together. And Russell and I have become, great colleagues over time, and we ended up doing another study some years later that finally got published, and we did essentially the same kind of thing. We asked different kinds of questions and published different articles. So we may have ended up publishing only one article about that study, but we had the different perspectives in that. So that's my orientation to my willingness to work with other people. I tend to indicate to my colleagues that if they are not clear about what their nursing perspective is, then getting into interdisciplinary or multiple disciplinary work, they're going to give up. They're going to go with the other, like the sociologist or the physician or somebody like that. And that, I think, doesn't help our discipline in the inward sense of building our knowledge. Certainly we do, as you said, we do borrow knowledge from other disciplines. What we don't do, though, very often is we never test to see if that knowledge is relevant in the people we serve. So, for example, I have a colleague who has since died several years ago now, and several years ago when I was at the University of Pennsylvania, she was doing research on people's attribution for illnesses, and I think she was looking at asthma and diabetes and maybe cardiac conditions, and so she was coming at an attribution theory, which says that everybody who has something happening to them, even students taking exams, attribute that to some cause. And so she was interviewing these people. It was a very, very skilled interviewer. She was a psychiatric mental health nurse and really, really, really very skilled in interviewing. And they worked out, the general question, the probes and everything. And she and her team kept asking these people, well, what do you think caused your asthma, or what caused your diabetes or your cardiac condition? And a whole bunch of people said, I don't know. And all the prompts that they had, everybody said, I don't know, just happened. And so there, this major tenet of attribution theory is that people attribute cause, and these people did not attribute cause. So we can, in my discussions with Barbara, we concluded that that attribution theory couldn't be a shared theory. So it was a fine theory in clinical psychology, but it didn't work for nurseology in that sense. So it had to be modified to be used in nurseology. So it couldn't be a shared theory. I mean, we do the same thing with growth and development theories. Like everybody says, oh, well, Piaget and Erikson and Freud and all the other people, that all of those theories apply regardless of the health condition of the person. But nobody thinks, and those theories tend to be, stage and age related. So chronologic age is you have a certain stage, and nobody thinks about, when they use it, they're not really taking into account that maybe a child who has had a chronic illness all of his or her life wouldn't go along with Piaget's cognitive stages in quite the same way. Maybe, but maybe not. And so we need to test those things, and nobody ever does. I mean, they just never do. They just say, yeah. And so what happens is the child is considered slow or retarded or something like that. So the child is given a label that's inaccurate because it's not taking the context of the child's health situation into account. And so I'm a big proponent of having testing theories from other disciplines that we find useful, but to test them to make sure that they really work, if you will, with our populations whom we serve.
Jacqueline, that was a very, very comprehensive answer. Thank you indeed. And when you were talking about the interviews, I've just been rereading Charles Briggs' Learning How to Ask, and there's so much that goes on in interviews, which is fascinating. That was really interesting. Thank you very much for your time today. It's been a pleasure speaking to you as always, and thank you.
Well, thank you. And I'd like to apologize to everyone for all that I write, because my passion really is writing and doing research and writing, and especially writing theoretical papers. And I know that they tend to be required reading in courses. And so I'm sorry that there's so much of it. I think if people start in more recent things and go backwards, they would probably be able to see what my most current thoughts are. So like I get something called, I think it's called ResearchGate, and it indicates when articles have been cited. And they're still citing my 1974, I think it was, or 84, I guess it was, 84 version of the meta paradigm, which has evolved over time a great deal. And so, if you start more recently, that's my message to people. Start with my most recent publications and go backwards. And if, and I tend to self-cite myself from time to time.
I think that's when I first encountered your work. Actually, it was back in the mid '80s, and thank you very.
I'm flattered that and honored that you would even think about my work.
It's been a pleasure speaking to you, and I think all nurses will encounter your thought, as I said, at one point or another, probably many points. Thank you again.
Well, thank you very much, Martin. It's been lovely talking with you.
Cheerio.
Bye. Thank you.